Album to be #1 in America. I hate definitely. And I hate him anyway, but
For decades, Robert Smith has stood as one of the most enigmatic figures in rock music. With his jet-black hair, smudged eyeliner, and a voice that could move between anguish and tenderness in a single breath. He defined an entire generation's sound through The Cure, while millions of fans saw him as a poet of melancholy, a master of atmosphere, and a reluctant icon of goth. Few ever heard him speak openly about his personal opinions on other bands. Smith cultivated mystery, often sidestepping questions with humor or evasion. But now, at 66, he has finally broken his silence, and what he revealed shocked even his most loyal followers. For the first time, Robert Smith has candidly admitted which 6 bands he truly hated the most. These weren't just minor disagreements or casual dislikes. They were groups that, in his words, embodied everything I never wanted music to become. His comments reveal not only a clash of artistic visions, but also the deeply personal philosophy that guided his career. As the story unfolds, it becomes clear that Smith's disdain wasn't born out of petty rivalries, but out of his refusal to compromise the art of music. These 6 bands, in one way or another, represented values, trends, or attitudes that ran counter to everything The Cure stood for. And while some of his confessions might surprise you, others will shed new light on the struggles he faced as an artist, trying to remain authentic in an industry that thrives on conformity. This is Robert Smith, like you've never heard him before. Brutally honest, unapologetic, and unafraid to name names. When Robert Smith finally began revealing the bands he despised, the first name on his list was a shock to some and a confirmation to others: the Rolling Stones. To most of the world, the Stones are rock royalty, legends whose music has influenced countless acts. But to Robert Smith, they represented something entirely different. In interviews over the years, he hinted at his disapproval of what he called old rock dinosaurs, groups that clung to formulas, stadium tours, and commercial dominance rather than the raw spirit of creativity. For Smith, the Rolling Stones embodied the very machine that turned rock music into a product rather than an art form. Smith often described his youth in Crawley, England, as a time of rebellion against what the mainstream offered. By the late 1970s, punk and post-punk bands like Susie and the Banshees, Joy Division, and The Damned gave him a sense of purpose. The Rolling Stones, on the other hand, seemed like the opposite: bloated, excessively commercial, and far removed from the personal struggles that inspired The Cure's music. "I never wanted to be Mick Jagger," Smith once said with a sly smile. It always seemed like performance without soul. It wasn't just about the music. To Robert Smith, the Stones represented a culture of excess that he found distasteful. Endless world tours, luxury lifestyles, and tabloid scandals made them symbols of rock aristocracy. The Cure, in contrast, built their identity around vulnerability, mood, and an often painful honesty that connected with fans on an intimate level. Smith resented the idea that rock was supposed to be glamorous. For him, it was supposed to be truthful, even when that truth was ugly. Critics sometimes accused Smith of hypocrisy, pointing out that The Cure eventually filled arenas and became global superstars. But Smith rejected the comparison. He insisted that success had never been his goal. And unlike the Stones, he argued, The Cure never chased trends or catered to corporate demands. If fame came, it was because audiences connected with the music, not because he bent to the industry's expectations. What made Smith's disdain sting even more was his refusal to show even polite deference. When asked in interviews about the Rolling Stones' legacy, he rarely softened his words. "They should have stopped a long time ago," he once remarked. Sometimes carrying on forever isn't brave, it's sad. These comments earned him criticism from older rock fans. But for many Cure loyalists, they only deepened their respect for Smith. Here was an artist unafraid to stand apart, even if it meant criticizing the untouchable. The truth was that Robert Smith's rejection of the Rolling Stones wasn't about bitterness. It was about principle. He believed music should evolve, take risks, and connect with listeners in ways that weren't dictated by commercial formulas. To him, the Rolling Stones symbolized the very opposite of that ethos. In the end, Smith's hatred of the Stones wasn't about personal rivalry. There had never been one. It was about what they represented in the larger story of rock music. For Robert Smith, they stood as a reminder of everything he refused to become: predictable, polished, and endlessly recycled. And in drawing that line, he carved out the space that allowed The Cure to remain one of the most enduringly original bands in modern music. The second band Robert Smith named in his list was none other than U2, a group whose global fame and political posturing made them both adored and resented in equal measure. To millions, U2 represented passion, activism, and soaring anthems that filled stadiums. But to Robert Smith, they embodied what he considered one of the worst traits in rock: self-righteousness. Smith's criticisms of U2 go back decades. In interviews, he never hid his distaste for Bono's grandstanding persona, calling him insufferable and mocking the band's tendency to deliver sermons between songs. "Music should speak for itself," Smith once said, "not be a lecture." For a man who valued intimacy, vulnerability, and atmosphere, U2's bombastic style felt like a betrayal of what rock music could and should be. The Cure's concerts were moody, immersive experiences where fans lost themselves in a swirl of sound and emotion. U2's shows, in contrast, were spectacles, massive productions filled with lights, slogans, and political messaging. While fans of U2 saw this as inspiring, Smith dismissed it as hollow grandstanding. "It's theater," he remarked once, "but it's not the kind I care for." Beneath the criticism was also a deeper clash of philosophy. Bono and U2 embraced the role of rock stars as saviors, using their platform to comment on world politics and global issues. Smith, however, believed that art should never posture as moral authority. His own songs rarely gave answers. They posed questions, expressed despair, or admitted confusion. To him, honesty meant admitting you didn't have the solutions. Watching U2 turn music into a pulpit felt disingenuous to his artistic sensibilities. Of course, it didn't help that U2's sound dominated the 1980s, a time when The Cure was carving its own path. Radio stations and MTV seemed obsessed with Bono and company, often sidelining darker, more alternative acts like The Cure. While Robert never directly accused U2 of overshadowing his band, fans and critics alike sensed his resentment. To him, U2 represented the kind of industry favoritism that pushed emotional, unconventional music to the margins. Smith also found their songwriting formula grating. In his view, U2 relied on the same soaring choruses and echoing guitar riffs, recycling their sound album after album. He prided himself on keeping The Cure unpredictable, shifting from bleak post-punk to lush pop ballads, to gothic anthems, to experimental detours. U2, on the other hand, seemed stuck in what Smith considered a cycle of repetition. Fans of The Cure often applauded Robert's willingness to stand his ground. His open disdain for U2 made him even more of an outsider hero, someone who refused to play along with the industry's worship of megastars. And though some accused him of jealousy, Smith brushed off the idea. "It's not about envy," he once said. "It's about honesty. I don't like what they do, and that's fine. Not everyone has to." What's perhaps most telling is that, even after decades of indirect jabs, Robert Smith never softened his stance. While other musicians eventually made peace with their rivals, Smith held his ground. To him, disliking U2 wasn't petty, it was a matter of artistic integrity. By drawing that line, he made clear what The Cure stood for: authenticity, emotional honesty, and music that spoke quietly but cut deep, rather than shouting from a mountaintop. For fans, it was a reminder of why they loved Robert Smith in the first place. In an industry full of compromise, he never hesitated to say exactly what he thought, even if it meant putting one of the world's biggest bands on his hate list. The third band, Robert Smith openly admitted he could never stand, was the Rolling Stones. To many, this came as a shock. After all, the Stones are often celebrated as one of the greatest rock bands of all time, with a career spanning decades, countless hits, and a reputation for being the ultimate rock and roll survivors. But for Robert Smith, their very longevity and their larger-than-life image symbolized something he despised about the music industry. Robert never minced words when asked about them. He once quipped that the Rolling Stones were just old men in leather pants pretending to be young. To him, their endless touring and reinvention felt less like genuine artistry and more like an industry machine built to squeeze every dollar out of nostalgia. Smith had little patience for what he saw as a refusal to age gracefully. "There's nothing sadder," he remarked in one interview, "than watching someone try to hold on to something they lost years ago." Beyond their image, Smith found their music underwhelming. While the Stones built their legend on swaggering blues rock, Smith dismissed it as formulaic and repetitive. He couldn't see the depth in songs that many hailed as classics. Where others praised Mick Jagger's showmanship and Keith Richards' riffs, Smith only saw posturing. "It's rock theater," he said, "but it doesn't